this is a rather large panel. So let's jump right in. You know, the point of this panel, right, is you are each representing different sectors, different areas. There is some overlap here and there. And so I'm just curious from your perspective, right? Some of you presented innovative ideas this morning or different ways of looking at solving issues or talking about an issue. Some of you are embedded in reporting on issues. From your perspective, what are some of the initial impressions that you had after hearing each other this morning on your talks? And how do you see them, your area, interrelating with another either already, or how do you maybe come away from this morning looking at your area in a different way and seeing a potential for collaboration with another area? Anybody want to go first? Don't all raise your hand. Go ahead, Dave. Thank you.
Sure. Well, you know, my company's in the communications business, and one of the basic human needs is to be able to communicate. And in listening to many of the speakers today, it was apparent to me that often we get caught in this silo mentality that things we're working on, we're not aware of what others are working on. And so the forum to communicate is really critical. And particularly for us, you know, you touched on economic development, housing, digital literacy, telehealth, and things like that. These are all things that we get involved with in the telecommunications arena. However, without the knowledge, the local and the acute knowledge that the user has, we're at a loss. We don't know what we don't know, right? In the sense that when there's areas where communications could improve a community, a housing project, a business, really doesn't matter. If we're not aware of it, it doesn't exist, right? It's the tree falling in the middle of the forest. If you don't hear it, it doesn't make any noise, right? And so what I took away from this morning's sessions from the collection of speakers here was there's an awful lot of awareness that needs to occur between all our groups, because we are all interconnected in many important ways. And for us, from an economic development perspective, we know that drives jobs, that drives tax base, that drives spending for schools, libraries, hospitals, things of that nature. So what we want to do as a company is be aware of some of these other needs that these other groups have throughout the region. And I think for me personally and for my company, just hearing some of these applications was critical. And whether it was in Long Beach with the economic development, or the doctor talking about some of the acute needs that can happen if the connections exist, well, this is the type of forum that allows the communities of interest to come together and really prioritize certain problems. So with that, I'll just back away, because I'll be very interested in some of the other speakers, what they have to say on the topic.
Anyone else? Kristen, go ahead.
Sure. So, I did want to point out, so at the County Chief Sustainability Office, we describe our work as very intersectional. So that I try to bring this lens to our work every day, but the context of the partners that you've assembled here, there is more intersectional thinking that you can always do. And I was actually really struck by Keith's presentation, and obviously our country and our region specifically have been thinking a lot about what public safety means, reimagining public safety. That's been a big conversation in the county. But I think what really struck me was Keith has been charged by the city to switch roles and to be in the fire role, right? And that's the kind of leadership. I think that to me means that he's an example of you have to have the sort of big picture involved, especially as a public servant, to be able to see, to create value and to work with partners, the community, to be asking that question. I really liked that framing. I think it goes across all parts of public service, or maybe if you're not in public service, sort of the civil society contribution that you or your company might be making. So that was really interesting to me.
Okay, Ahmed.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, I think when, my presentation was about transportation, but a lot about like public space. And I think when we think about transportation, we often think about the really obvious connections and intersections that it has with things like sustainability and economic development and freight and communication networks and whatnot. But oftentimes we forget about the things that we don't think about analytically in some ways. In that our public rights of way, so our streets, are publicly owned property. And a lot of the things that happen in the streets are things that are related to public safety, and some of our social works that Layla touched on, and that housing is also a major issue in transportation as well, because housing is the number one cost for most families, and transportation is the number two cost of most families, and that those things often have direct effects to each other. When you go to a less expensive place, it often means you have to pay more expensive transportation costs. And then public health as well, is that in figuring out how to kind of unlock the underlying issues where these intersections happen, and how to find win-win-wins across the board, and really trying to gain collective momentum around places where we have wins in all different sectors, because oftentimes they're not actually really that difficult to find. We just need to think about them pretty analytically and really pull apart some of that root cause analysis to start to figure out how can I make a positive impact in a number of different areas.
Thanks. Keith?
Yeah, first off, I just wanted to publicly thank you, Christian, for including us, because I think a lot of times in my industry in public safety, we generally become highlighted and called on once everything's going wrong. And I even mentioned that in what I was talking about. That's a terrible time to try to get me to convince people that we could be part of the solution rather than be the focus on a problem. So just your consideration of public safety in this intersection discussion has been very, very important to me. Kristen, thank you for your comments. I think that the farther that we move public safety towards seeing themselves as a small part of a larger society rather than kind of a siloed entity that just deals with problems after they have occurred, then we might help flip the narrative a bit on who we are. So thank you for including us, and I'm really happy to be a part of it.
Marianne?
Yeah, thanks also for having. I'm EMS, and we've had to intersect with any of a number of programs in order, to meet the needs during the pandemic. And it's really taught me several things, which I think some of you have highlighted already. One is that we often operate in silos and we don't reach out to those that impact. Sometimes we don't see the multidisciplinary opportunities that are there. And I think some of you have highlighted that already. Just listening what other people do actually creates ideas in your head that maybe there are those intersections that could be utilized in order to get a project done, do it better, and have a broader impact. And I think that's kind of what I've seen. There's nothing that you do well that you do alone. Almost everything involves, the communication, as Dave mentioned. It's working together, working with others, and that intersection is really what truly makes a great leader, and also what makes a great program. And so that's kind of my takeaway from this is that we really need to find ways to work with others and intersect with those. Even if it's on the fringe, there's probably some overlap that helps truly build good projects and with great impact.
John, I saw your hand go up and then down. So did you want to comment, or were you stepping back?
No, I think for us in economic development now, we absolutely depend upon collaboration with transportation, both infrastructure builders as well as agencies who manage transportation infrastructure. That's airports, seaports, highways, freeways, rail, because that's how we move goods, services, and people around the economy. And then secondly, every single city in this region represents a different opportunity for economic activity. So some people have warehousing space, some people have big office buildings, some have affordable housing. I mean, the fact that we have this massive regional economy between LA and Orange County with over $1 trillion of GDP means that people have all kinds of different needs, but companies can find something that they need and want to build their business somewhere in the region. So everything we do now is integrated and through collaboration.
Tom.
Thanks, Christian. I think the word of the hour so far is silo. I've heard at least three people reference it. We have to be careful in the university that we don't become a part of the problem, right? That we're part of the solution. One of the things that we've observed through the pandemic, and it hasn't always been pretty, but we're in the process of redefining what the educational system looks like, what the classroom looks like, and who we serve. And the presentations this morning were a stark reminder of our need to be much more aware of the community that we serve and the diversity of that community and how we can better interact with them on the research side, on the education side, and in support of the wide range of programs that we heard about. It was a big takeaway for me.
Okay, so before I move on to the next question, I just want to check in with Liam, Kevin, and Lila and see if you guys wanted to comment on that first question or not. And you can just nod your head no if you don't. Okay, so then let me move on, right? I want to bring up a handful of themes. I mean, none of you spoke to each other prior to putting together your talks, right? But there were themes that came out in a variety of them. Some more overt than others, but empathy, vision, collaboration, innovation, connectivity, right? These were things that a lot of you were kind of touching on, and so I'm really curious. Let's start with empathy, right? So Ahmed, you really kind of dug into empathy as being a kind of a foundational tool to looking at transportation and mobility, right? I think Lila, in what you do, or even in Keith, in your perspective, talking about the Redondo approach to homelessness, empathy is there. Where else, can empathy become more of a foundational guidepost, if you will, towards the way we create policy, or in some of your perspectives, whether you're working in partnership as a municipal entity or an NGO or even a commercial entity? How can that kind of foundationally shift the way we do things from the more status quo thinking that we can easily fall into?
I can start if that works. So when the climate vulnerability assessment process that I discussed in my presentation, that was an outgrowth of the countywide sustainability plan that our office put together and the Board of Supervisors adopted in 2019. And that was a 2-year listening process, essentially. And I think that to your question of how does empathy fit in these other spaces, I think especially for government to come to folks and say, we feel like there's a need for a vision, but we don't want to articulate it ourselves. We want it to come from you. And that people are really struck by that type of approach. To say, well, don't you usually kind of craft things and then do a little workshop and give us 7 days to respond and then the thing is done? So just coming to sort of shifting and say, we're co-creating things with you. You are the author of this. that sort of deep listening. I don't think we described it as empathy, but I think that's a piece of it is giving people real opportunity to weigh in. And by real opportunity, I mean, we had lots of different venues and different types of conversations. But when we crafted the county sustainability plan, we got outside funding to be able to do stipending of organizations. If you sort of met criteria, somebody like a domestic workers' rights organization who might not see themselves as part of sustainability, they have real life lived experience wisdom to share that relate to sustainability. But if they're doing a bunch of other things and they don't have the capacity, but you provide them the capacity in the form of stipending and whatever resources folks need to participate, it's just a different kind of conversation. People will be, they don't sugarcoat things for you. They're willing to come to the table and have real conversation and share and understand that you value their lived experience as wisdom, as insight, as important as what consultants that you also pay to share their insights with government. So we're sort of doing a similar process with the climate vulnerability assessment now. So that's sort of our take on an empathetic, at least process.
Got it. Liam.
Yeah, I think I want to just underscore what you're saying, Christian. I think, frankly, if you want to boil it down to one of the biggest problems when it comes to housing issues, not just in the Southern California region, but statewide, and in some cases even nationally, is a lack of empathy. I hear a lot of, sure, I support more housing development, or I support more affordable housing development, or I support more homeless housing development, but somewhere else, right? And I think, part of that is kind of the nature of the fact that we're so segregated, income patterns segregated, we're segregated racially, we're segregated by class, and that lack of empathy isn't there. I'm in a hotel room in Fresno right now, writing a story. I'm here reporting a story about the housing situation in Fresno, and I hear a lot in LA, and I've heard a lot in the Bay Area. Well, we just need to build more housing in Fresno where it's cheaper. Well, Fresno right now has the largest rent increases over the past 4 years of any city in the country. More people in Fresno, more renters in Fresno spend more than half their income on rent than renters in Los Angeles. And so, if you're exporting folks to LA, then in fact, you could be from LA, you can be in many ways exacerbating some of the housing issues that already exist in different regions of the state. And so I think, that issue, that lack of empathy, I think is particularly pronounced in the housing space. I think one of the main reasons why we have as big of a housing problem as we do.
Ahmed.
Yeah, I think I would want to start from the perspective of maybe like hearing and listening, right? Because I think Kristen made some really, really great points, and we need to recognize that oftentimes we're experts in our field, right? So like from a transportation perspective, I'm an expert in transportation. I'm not an expert in anybody's lived experience. They're an expert in that, right? And when we walk into a situation, we need to not just hear what they're saying, we need to listen to what they're saying. Because they aren't experts in our line of work, oftentimes we need to listen to what they're experiencing and then use our training and our experience to devise solutions to help mitigate some of the experiences that they're having. So I would just add on to kind of what Kristen was saying is, yes, we need to go out, we need to hear from people directly, but we also need to take back what we hear and not expect them to give us solutions. It's not their job to give us the solutions. It's their job to give us their input. I'd say that would be the biggest thing from my perspective as far as empathy goes and how to bring it into city government. And then I think the second element is oftentimes as the government, we think too often about what's happening to us because it's just human nature, right? This is how it's going to affect me. This is how it's going to affect the government. This is how it's going to affect my tax base. This is how it's going to affect my this, that, or a third, rather than putting ourselves in the shoes of the community as to what we're trying to solve and what solutions we're trying to have. So, you know, from a city council perspective, I mean, I was an engineer, right, a transportation engineer. So we'd have a project, the project would be sitting in front of us. It would be to install, you know, a traffic signal somewhere. And we're thinking too often about how am I going to install my traffic signal? Where's my fiber going to be connected? You know, where are my poles going to be located? And not thinking about what is the purpose of this traffic signal and creating a kind of a direct line of logic between our values and mission as a community to what I'm delivering on the ground and how that's actually going to happen in real life and in real tactical ways.
Before I go to you, Marianne, I want to kind of ping off of something that Liam just brought up. And, you know, coming from my perspective as a policy person, I actually agree with everything you're saying, right? Like, it's always been super important to me to really listen and try to hear everybody's perspective, but everybody does not agree, right, on perspectives. And then that becomes kind of a challenge as a policymaker, is how do you make everyone feel heard, even if the ultimate result doesn't get there? So Kevin, I want to go to you because, right, your whole idea to me comes from an empathetic space, right? But then from an innovative space, right? Both for how you want to finance it, and then, you know, the fact that you want to build it for, you know, a third of the cost and a third of the time, right? And to me, like, how does your vision for what you're doing play into the greater scope, and how do you find, like, what Liam's, you know, calling the NIMBYism, or what I would say is really more a fear of change, right? The people just have a fear of change, and so they don't want to see things happen around them. But you have this innovative idea that could really make a big difference in any community that's willing, you know, or a commercial entity that's really willing to sell you a property. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, one thought about the whole NIMBYism concept is that actually some of the NIMBYs are empathetic. You know what I mean? They would like to have people housed. They just don't want it next to them or near them. They just don't want to see it or be part of it. But, you know, I think that there is universally, or it's very common, that empathy exists in these different silos. So the construction industry would love to figure out a way to build housing faster for those in need. You know, all these different interests are interested in how they can impact the problem. It's just there hasn't been any, like Ahmed was saying, there hasn't been an entity or a group thinking about how do we get to that result and what would lead us to that result, you know, in the most efficient way. And really, that's where Flyaway Homes sort of comes from. It's just the fact that, you know, we started as a social service agency having clients that need housing affordably, you know, with supportive services. So how do we do that? And that sort of was the impetus, the empathy that sort of tried to look at, well, the answer is housing. You know, that's not an easy thing to deliver, but how is it being done right now? How can we get other interested groups that would love to be part of the solution? How do we have them be part of the solution? And sort of there was, what was missing was a quarterback or somebody to organize and allow for these people to participate in delivering housing for homeless people at the end of the day. So I think that there's a great will. I think the government can participate in a similar way by listening and understanding the challenges that, you know, prevent what the goal is to provide housing for different groups that are really in need. What's slowing that down, and, you know, how could policy potentially speed it up, or, you know, deliver it at a price point where developers will actually be interested in putting capital and energy towards those types of activities. And then, of course, there are other interests that are not in alignment with that. So it's how can we sort of all be on the same page and work towards the same goal, and form a policy that sort of addresses all those issues. But it is a big challenge, and that's why, you know, Flyaway sort of sees half of our mission. I mean, we are developers, but it's trying to really work with governments and understand what the issues are, in order to make it easier for others to participate in this arena.
Marianne, you just got to unmute. You're still muted, though.
My God. Having done about 1 billion Zoom calls this last year, I find it challenging that I still don't unmute appropriately sometimes. Anyway, I was going to say there was some question in the chat for Kevin relative to modular units and being 4 stories. So I don't know if Kevin wanted to address that first, and then I could comment.
Well, go ahead, quick, Kevin. But I want to make. I think we'll try to answer those questions separately so that we can have the conversation.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer offline modular questions. I'm happy to do it.
Perfect.
All right, what I've noticed, and you asked about empathy, it's really understanding somebody else's position and then incorporating that into sustainable solutions if indeed problems exist, and they do. And examples of that is just what the public health guidance, and then what public health guidance is, and then it was the delivery of healthcare during the pandemic, right? So they needed to really understand our position that having healthcare workers that were exposed and you quarantine them for 14 days is going to deplete the workforce when only a small percentage of them were turning positive. So the issue is, how could they understand and empathize with our position to create the workforce that's necessary to care for the public, still be protect the public from the healthcare workers if indeed they were transmitting disease, and just really understanding both of our positions in a way to create guidance. And so that's what happened. There's certainly things during this time period that have been extremely challenging, and that to be able to reach out and be empathetic with somebody else's position has led to really sustainable solutions for which we can feel and get behind and be able to promote to our staff and to get done. So I think empathy really does play a big role because, as I said, it leads to solutions that will last over time and not just go away or be ignored for that matter.
Before I go to Dave, Lila, your job and everything you do on a daily basis, right? It comes from an empathetic perspective, right? And in dealing with unhoused individuals. But how do you see, and I know you don't maybe think about like the bigger picture, right? Because you are right in the weeds. But from your perspective, what do you see the rest of us, outside needing to do to help you accomplish your goals? Where can empathy help the unhoused situation improve from your perspective?
Well, I have to say I'm really grateful to be able to work so closely with the Redondo Beach Police Department. There's no way we would be able to engage these individuals without empathy. Just going into, just say for instance, the DPSS office to just get simple benefits. I can't tell you how many times, a staff member, it could have been a security guard, that was just not empathetic at all. Most of the unsheltered have a backpack, so they have to empty out their entire backpack of all the belongings in front of everyone. And, we've had some pretty rough security guards and staff. And, we probably took a week or two to set up this appointment, and they ended up just walking away, So housing appointment, same thing. We go in there and we meet a landlord or a property manager that is not empathetic. It's not going to work. It definitely won't work. They'll just shut down and, that'll be it. I mean, this work cannot be done without empathy all the way around. Healthcare, going into the doctor's office or a hospital, same thing. So it's really important to be successful at getting them off the street.
All right, Dave, let's close out this question with you. Go ahead.
Sure. Particularly coming after that last set of comments, when you talk about empathy, it really boils down to understanding too, right? And then once you have that understanding of what the problem or the issue is, you really have to think in terms of what is the improvement that's necessary to occur to just make that person or the situation better. And one of the things that it always, crossed my mind is you've got to give people tools, and those tools have to be readily available to them. In our world, my world anyway, it's the digital tools and creating digital literacy and things like that, and to democratize those tools so everyone has them available is part of the challenge. We're doing our part, and we have to do a lot more, quite frankly, through the South Bay Fiber Network to distribute those tools to more places. But it really has to, and it goes back to what the chief said earlier this morning about value. How do you create value? And all these things, the empathy, the understanding, the drive to create solutions, those devised solutions that Ahmed had mentioned, have to be in our DNA on a daily basis. And so I think whatever our respective expertise is, that has to be one of the common denominators for us to create a collective regional improvement on whatever the problem may be. And for us in the telecom world, it's all about communications. And our biggest challenge is getting those fiber optic cables, for example, connected to more places so kids, doctors, nurses, educators have more availability so that we can not just understand the problem, because we do, we're empathetic enough to do something about it. And that's where we want to be. And that's one of our biggest challenges, is to do that as quickly as possible with the funding we have.
Okay, so let me move on. So some of the things that we, were discussed are, and some of the issues we face are more systemic issues, right? They're much bigger than a municipality or a sub-region or region. And it sometimes overrides our ability to effectuate change. But the term vision came up in a lot of people's talks, right? And so in the context of the pandemic, right, we have, it's affected all of our jobs, it's affected all of our lives in multiple ways. But everybody adapted, right? Everybody had to flex and pivot. And so I'm just curious from your perspectives, how do you see that mindset like carrying forward, being more nimble, and, what are the implications for how we do things on a go forward basis, and or, the interplay, say, between your sectors? Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. I think the solution there is you've got to allow people to be creative and empower them, and even allow them to fail. I think in a lot of organizations, be they private or in government, if we expect 100% success out of everything that we're asking people to do or try, and then they're damaged when it doesn't work out, what we can expect 100% of the time is they're never going to come up with another idea or take another risk to push things forward. So I know that in my line of work, it's hugely important, and that doesn't really fit well with our kind of traditional cultural structure, military rank system. But when we can promote that type of environment, I think that's where we're going to have the biggest gains and successes for when, stuff like a pandemic does happen, because you don't want to rely on just a few people to be the action takers to make your agency nimble. You need everybody. And if you don't have an open communication and a way to allow that idea to kind of percolate up from the bottom, then you're just going to miss stuff. And I think that's why in really nimble agencies do well in times of crisis, because they empower their people to create ideas and take risks, even if they're going to fail some of the time.
John?
Yeah, I'll build off of what Keith was just saying and take that out to the community level. So you want to do it through partnerships, through cross-sectoral partnerships, and you want to do it with community-based organizations, delivering your services and creating feedback loops with those people who are closest to the community, who are feeding back to you non-traditional ways to deliver service. So as an example, we spent most of our CARES Act money in economic development over the last 6 months actually granting funds to community-based organizations and nonprofits who spoke Spanish, who spoke Khmer, who spoke Tagalog, who are nestled in the community with those entrepreneurs and businesses that were suffering, with those residents and people who were impacted. And what happened is not only did we make a lot of really good friends because we were handing out money to nonprofits to deliver this service, but we built their capacity, we built our network, and we built this really, really strong ecosystem. So now as we get ready for this massive $50 million economic package that we're rolling out in Long Beach, we're going to be working with partners that are ready to rock and roll. Just as an example, our digital inclusion program actually was composed of 12 different community-based and nonprofit partners who are nestled in the different geographic areas of town. So what Keith was saying is you do not want to wait to develop your relationships when a crisis has already hit. You have to spend months, if not years, building the systems that actually are integrated and build capacity among your partners, both private and public sector, so that when that situation occurs, not only do you have communication flow going both ways, but you're able to evolve and innovate your service delivery based on that constant feedback you get from your partners who are on the ground. So I think it's innovation and being nimble is more about partnerships and communication and networks that you create in advance of needing them.
Liam.
I just want to reflect this question back both on my presentation earlier and also the previous question that you asked, Christian, which is, I think in terms of being nimble and how things may be changing after post-pandemic or as we're heading hopefully towards the end of dealing with the pandemic, it starts with a recognition of how uneven the economic impacts of this pandemic has been in really every sector, right? White collar workers have been generally fine economically, while blue collar workers and service workers have not, right? Have been indescribable economic impact. Some folks being out of work for a year, right? Or more at this point. And a lot of the benefits, the expanded unemployment benefits, that's ultimately going to go away probably before folks are able to get jobs back, right? These rental assistance money may help clear the backlog of someone's past due rent, but if someone doesn't have a job, then what are they going to do to pay the rent the next month? And are they going to be on the verge of eviction again? And so I think, thinking about how to be nimble and how to change requires understanding those in power who have not felt the economic impacts of the pandemic or the health impacts of the pandemic in the same way, understanding and realizing that a lot of the focus and attention has to be directed towards those who have really, really, really been hurting.
Couldn't agree more. Anybody else want to comment on that?
I'll just second what Liam said about making sure that the recovery is focused on the people who were hit the hardest. And to name that here in Los Angeles, it was Latinas. Latinas are the ones doing the domestic work, doing home health care, and that's living in conditions where there's overcrowding in individual units. So and also just to recognize that a lot of people didn't make it, right? That we had a lot of death, and there's a lot of people who are still suffering from that and haven't really fully grieved their families. So I think that we do still, as a region, as a country, still need to step back and be okay with taking that time to process that, because that's trauma that we've all experienced together. I think we probably, even with all of us, generally have some privilege, know somebody who has gone through something like that. So do want to recognize that that's still something we should all deal with together.
Anyone else? All right, so the time goes by super fast. We've got 5 minutes left. So I'm gonna pose one last question here, and hopefully we can hear from everybody. And I guess it'll play a little bit off of where we just were, right? So where, from your perspectives, right? Some of you do work in government, some don't. But from your perspectives, what should we, as policymakers, right? So that either at the local level, the county level, and or the state level, right? Because like I said in the previous question, some of our issues are more systemic, even to the point that Liam just made, right? But what should we be doing at these levels of government in general? Or what should the public sector be doing as well to advance both the recognition of everything we talked about today and or the intersectionality and how we can improve the collaborative effort between each of these areas to get from A to B faster. So final thoughts. And I can just go in a round robin here. I'll start with Tom.
Sure, thanks, Christian. Well, I think my response would be we have to stop making policy in isolation. The clearest example I have from my world of workforce development is that often we're solving the wrong problem. The workforce policies address training and education, but they don't address access to the workplace, which is a mobility issue. Logistics and the freight sector is a huge opportunity for the employment base in Southern California, but less than 10%, far less than 10% of those workplaces are accessible by transit under a 1 hour trip. So looking at how workforce policy can intersect with mobility policy will help us go a long way in solving the right problem.
Dave?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. I think at a root level, we have to abhor the status quo. We cannot accept that things today are as they should be. We should always assume things can and should be better than they are today. And if we start there, there's always something that can be done, even little things. And oftentimes, just improving the systems slightly, as Dr. O'Brien just mentioned, fixing that one problem can reap huge returns for those that are impacted by it. So my takeaway is we can't get comfortable. All right, the moment you're comfortable, you're doing something wrong. We have to always be seeking some sort of solution that's within our own confines of our capabilities, and seek, the guidance of others that will be impacting, and cross-pollinate from other experts to see what we can do that would make our situation as we perform on a daily basis better for those that will actually consume whatever it is we do. So my takeaway is, get rid of the status quo. We've got to fight for a better world, and this is how you start.
Kevin. Oh, Kevin, just turn. You go.
Yep. So I think that, this sort of a charrette style of conversation where you bring in the different silos and allow everybody to sort of explain their point of view, and with the idea that how can we all work together, to find these solutions and collaborate, and leave some room for, risk taking and potential error. I think that really will lead to some of the more innovative solutions. And there's definitely a part for government to play in those types of charrette interactions.
Marianne?
Yeah, I just in reflecting on all this, I as I said before, there's nothing that I've done or that I've seen done really well and singly or by one person. So collaboration really, to me, is the word of the day. There are some things that are status quo that work. I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I do agree that you constantly, and Dave, just to dovetail with your comments, you constantly have to reevaluate what you're doing and see if you can do it better. And I do believe that collaboration, reevaluation, innovation, and all play a role in, kind of moving things forward. And I think complacency is what you were speaking to. You don't want to be complacent. Complacent means you're just happy with what you have all the time and you never re-explore. I do believe that that reevaluation is really critical, and through that, getting input from others would help point out some of those areas that reevaluation should take place. So,
Kristen?
Climate change has to do with everything. So I think, like I said, we think about the intersections a lot. I mean, come talk to me anytime about how if you don't see a relationship with your work and climate change, then we'll see if there is one together. So that's sort of what I would like to leave this with, is that, I mean, I just went through each of our panelists in my head, and I can think of some conversation that we could have related to climate change. So our door is always open, and we're really happy that the COG has been a great partner and continues to be. So thanks for having me and for bringing this collaborative together.
Ahmed.
As you asked that question, I kind of like thought to myself that I never actually in my presentation explained what I do at CityFi. But at the center of what our philosophy at CityFi on a consulting basis is that we work with the public and private sector around the idea that doing the right thing is not necessarily bad business. And that if you can align with the public sector and the private sector, that the rising tide will lift all the boats. And that there's a way to have kind of a triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. That when you do the right thing for people and for the planet, that you will make money doing it. That's kind of my answer to that question, even though it's a little bit roundabout.
That's okay. All right, we got 3 minutes. Lila.
The only thing that I could think of in what I do, we need affordable housing. So if you can help in that way, I love what Flyaway does. Like I said, you can work years with these individuals, and if we don't have low income housing, we're stuck, and maybe give everyone the same access to these services, including our unsheltered medical care, whatever it may be. And then maybe removing a lot of the red tape for some of our subsidized housing, removing that, because that could take about a year or two, and that's too long to have them living on our street.
Fair enough. Keith?
Why I love Lila. That was what I was going to say, that the political leadership can help us with. You've got to help cut through red tape. It'll allow for more innovation. And, I think we can committee ourselves to death looking for the answer to absolutely every single issue when we're trying to implore a new idea. So, get something 70% done, and let's pilot it and try it and learn from it and make new models going forward.
John.
Yeah, I would just add, read and know your history. I think that there's a tremendous amount of wisdom in the historical cycle of sociological, economic, political history. And, we can learn a lot about what's coming based on understanding what's already happened. So I would say become a student of American government, American history, as well as looking at what's gone on before us. And it can provide a lot of wisdom about what's coming next.
Kind of harkens back to Tom's opening talk about lifelong learning. Okay, Liam, let's close out with you as clearly the journalist observer of all of this. Your final thoughts.
Just very quickly in terms of advice to the policymakers here, that I think, open-mindedness and flexibility when it comes to designing some of the policies that are coming out of this, because you don't know, and no one can know what the ultimate underlying problems are going to be. Just a very quick example when it comes to the rental relief and rental housing space. Can't tell you how many renters I've talked to who've said, I've maxed out my credit card, I've borrowed money from my family, but I'm actually current on rent. None of the rental assistance money coming from the government helps that person right now, right? But that person clearly has been affected, clearly needs help. And so policymakers, should keep in mind the myriad ways that people are responding to economic distress and be able to assist them when they're needed, how they're needed.
Thank you. Listen, thanks everyone for being here today and taking the time out to do your talks and to do this panel. I am really appreciative of it and appreciative of all your insight and can't wait to hear all the great things you do going forward. Right now, folks, we're jumping right over to the next panel, which is the intersection of the private and the public sector. So please log out of here and click into the next session. Thanks.